Welcome to Growth Layer, an interview series that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build in health and family. And today I'm excited to welcome Sarthak Sawarkar, the founder and CEO of Sama Fertility, a health tech startup reimagining fertility care with the first fully at-home protocol designed to reduce costs, simplify care, and create access. Welcome, and let's dive in.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So, one of the topics and the points that we were talking about before we even got on is that the average IVF cycle in the United States, the costs range from 15 to 20,000, and that could also include medications and add-ons. And what Sama is doing is bringing this level of care starting at 6,000. And that was one of the first things that came to mind for me is how are you doing that? And how is that possible, even before we go into the origin story and what inspired you to birth Sama?
Yeah, absolutely. The price point that you mentioned, 15,000, is definitely without the add-on. So it doesn't include medications, often will not include biopsy even in that price point. You know, the question I usually answer this most of the times is with a question right back, which is, why is it so expensive? Like we all have to pause, take a step back, and truly understand sort of how the field has evolved to be the way it is today. It's nothing short of science fiction. It's almost magic, right? We make human beings in a plate. Scientific classification aside, they aren't human beings when they're in a plate. Don't want to wade into any kind of controversy there. But the idea is that when we move those cells into a person, they definitely grow out to be human beings. And that is insane. So obviously we end up thinking, okay, so this has to be expensive. So one of the first things that we just start right from the assumption, right from the base assumption, is that something like this has to be expensive. And that magic definitely was something that I lived with. I've now been a part of the field for a better part of a decade and a half at this point in time. I'm dating myself here, but I started off more on the lab side, came into the care delivery side almost without a plan. Needed care, and me and my partner moved incidentally much further down into Jersey. And back then, it was around COVID when we thought that we needed care. And the only way that, despite having most of the amazing doctors on my phone that I could message, actually getting that care was not accessible. It wasn't possible for me for the three main reasons. One is the time taken that I would have had to essentially allocate. Me and my partner, my wife now, would have had to allocate towards receiving care. She would simply have to give up, her job to it. Just wasn't available. During COVID, I don't know if you know, but a lot of the clinics just shut down. The second aspect of this is geography, as I mentioned. There were no clinics that I wanted to go to close to where I lived. And the third aspect was the cost part of it, right? It was expensive. And we at Sama decided to interrogate every one of these, right? Let's start with the cost, because you brought that up first. Why is it so expensive to get care? Well, I think one of the major reasons is because as the science evolved, it came about in a way that any science experiment would basically be brought about together, right? So you are creating this amazing experiment. You want to make sure you have scientists, your nurses, your doctors, your billers, everybody under one roof, which means you have to create this massive capital intensive IVF clinic that houses all of these people, that runs. It's basically like flying a plane. You're flying it no matter how many people are in it, right? So you have to keep it fully staffed. You have to have really beautifully designed lobbies. I love so many of these lobbies. But all of this costs is then being passed on to the patient. So one big aspect of this is just not needing the traditional brick and mortar setup, which we are really proud of at Sama, is that we are able to give extraordinarily comparable care to our patients without them having to, sit in the lobby, wait in the lobby, etc. The second aspect of cost always comes from the lab side. And again, it's the same exact analogy. It's an airplane. You hire an embryologist, a senior embryologist. You're hiring all of these things. You're opening up a bottle of media. It's all going to cost the exact same unless it is optimized for scale. And most IVF clinics don't operate the lab at scale. So what we have done at Sama is that we say, and we work with partners that are able to work with us on pricing, given the fact that we fill up the metaphorical seats here. We become accessible to patients who aren't able to get care, right? Thereby, now we're benefiting the IVF lab that is then able to pass on that cost benefit to the patient. And the last aspect of this comes down to how we operate as a clinic, right? Sama Fertility operates on possibly one of the most intelligent patient management softwares that exists out there in fertility today. That's the crux of everything. Let me explain to you in a second how it is different than other softwares, and then we can dig deeper into it. But most of healthcare, and you're very experienced in this, but most of healthcare is extremely procedural. Procedural operations usually lead to a large degree of variation between locations and between individuals, right? Every individual nurse has their own way of doing things, and the human mind just works in a way where you have a base sense that we need to go from A to B to C to D to E. And if something doesn't line up, you generally just end up bypassing it, or you end up creating a new process that exists inside of that particular procedural workflow for the eternity of lifetime. What we've done at Sama is we've actually tried to create a declarative patient management software, and I'm more than happy to expound on it later. But this essentially takes away most of the procedural workflows within the clinic. It essentially makes the clinic about 8 times more efficient than a standard IVF clinic, which means we hire less, which means our payroll's lower, which means that, again, we're able to pass on that benefit to our patients.
Wow. That was a very comprehensive, thorough, and concise answer to how you've been able to keep costs so efficient. Wow.
As long as I didn't put everybody to sleep, I
I
think
know.
it was. I think it was comprehensive. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, and you already alluded to some of this, but what has inspired you to birth Sama? And I felt like we got a sense and a glimpse of it in what you shared so far. But, as to become a founder, a multiple time founder, it requires conviction. And it also requires, in my opinion, a resilience to keep going. So I'm curious as to what has really inspired the ability to bring Sama to life, to birth Sama.
Day one, right? Sama's mission has always been to get care to patients wherever they are. There is no second mission to what we do. If you're able to get really high quality care to patients wherever they are, you have solved most of the access issues around fertility, even most of healthcare for that matter. But my personal story apart, right? When I decided to, in fact, start Sama Fertility, I ended up shadowing IVF clinics myself because I'd never worked inside an IVF clinic, right? I'd spoken at IVF clinics as a part of my job at Cooper, but never really figured out anything around patient management, IVF center management, or anything like that. What drove me to do that was a fundamental gap in recognizing why an IVF center existed the way it did. And so I said, the only way to do it is literally go into the thick of things. So I shadowed around, about 6 months, had copious amounts of notes, and recognized what I alluded to in sort of the procedural versus the declarative way of operation in most of the IVF clinics. And that was sort of the academic portion of it. So the personal side was a fundamental, you feel quite frankly just shorted that you aren't able to get the care that you want, and half of the field. Imagine the people that don't know anyone, they are in a loop. I'll give you a story of a friend of mine that I visited in Texas. 7 years in, OBGYN has just put them on, you'll get pregnant, keep trying cycle. Right? 7 years in. And this is a person that essentially is moving past their prime reproductive age. And even IVF is going to stop becoming a viable option for them in years, if not months. Right. And all of these, personal sort of stories, just personally, literally me, I had an issue finding clinics. that I could have gone to. We were doing, we were thinking about it in terms of elective preservation at that point in time. And eventually, by the way, we did end up electively using Sama to freeze our own embryos. But at that point in time, just going in and just waiting at the clinic seemed impossible. It would have taken me about 90 minutes, me and my wife, just one way every day, notwithstanding the traffic on the 95.
And so I guess, are there any limitations to locations right now? And how have you decided on which locations to focus on? Is that driven by demand? Is that driven by the ability to fulfill? I'm very curious around the fulfilling and the logistics of that delivery.
So that is an amazing question. I think there's a book called Zero to One, which uses a term called leap of faith assumptions, right? And we started off with a very strong leap of faith assumption that Sama is going to be solving for a problem where it's going to be used by folks in remote areas. And then it is, we are going to drive patients from remote areas, not urban areas, to our partners. So we ended up choosing cities that had large airports that patients could fly in and out of. So we have a center in Los Angeles, we have a center in New York. And then over the last few months, we've now started working with the amazing Dr. Robert Kiltz and his team over at CNY Fertility. So we have access to most of CNY Fertility locations.
Wow.
That leap of faith assumption proved out to be wrong with my second patient. Right. And has consistently stayed, pretty much along sort of that initial data point, which suggested that this was not just filling a gap of helping people in remote locations, but also solving for people that wanted a more convenient option. I'll give you an example, right? If anyone who you know went through sleep studies in pulmonology about less than like a decade ago, they would have had to go at night, right? Sleep in a completely weird bed. They'll like hook you up with electrodes all along, and then they'll wake you up at 4 a.m. in the morning saying your study's concluded, and then you go home and your readouts are then sent to you, right? It's pretty analogous to how fertility is right now. Like, oh, you have to come in because you have to get your ultrasound done, you have to get your blood work done, not really figuring out if we can move this to the patient's home. And that's exactly what we thought of, right? That was the evolution. It's like, is there a way we can get the care that the patients need into their own home? What are the alternatives that are available out there that we can tightly integrate under sort of the guardrails of this amazing system that we've built, which makes sure that it's safe to do what we are doing? For example, in pulmonology, I think 95% of sleep studies are done at home. Nobody goes to clinics anymore. And that's the point that I think fertility is driving towards, which is that most cases should be able to receive care in a convenient and a very accessible format at home. If there is a case that is harder, that goes into the clinic. And this benefits both the patient and the clinic, because the patient obviously is a happy camper. They've received care at home, it's convenient, it's affordable. And then the clinics, in fact, can now scale faster because they don't need to set up, hundreds of locations for growing their footprint.
I love that. And that makes so much sense, tapping into the market inefficiencies on both sides. Right now, with the current state, where are you finding that your customers, are they more concentrated across even the larger metro areas, or is it a pretty even mix with the more remote areas where access is often a barrier? I'm kind of curious what the breakdown is.
That's such a great question. The split's been even, right? We have now seen as many patients that would have never received care. We have handwritten notes, beautiful handwritten notes. I should have sat with one today that we get from our patients. And I've put one up on my LinkedIn channel for anybody who wants to, on my LinkedIn page, for anybody who wants to go check it out. But you can literally look at that note and it says, I wouldn't have been able to get care if it wasn't for Sama. This patient would have never entered an IVF clinic if it wasn't for us. I have a video also on our YouTube channel from a previous patient who lived in Santa Monica. How many IVF clinics are there in Santa Monica? Right, enough if I throw a stone, I would probably hit one.
Yeah.
right? And we have patients coming in sort of from both spectrums. They're probably evenly distributed, but our learning right now is that people want this. People are
Mhm.
happy receiving this. Anybody who goes through it once invariably ends up coming back to us to pursue a second format of treatment.
Demand is there, right? I mean, we know that the need is there, the demand is there, and the market is there. But how are they finding you, and how are you finding that creating the trust is effective? Because it is a process that requires a lot of trust in the process, and then now you're bringing a new solution to market.
Yeah, absolutely. The trust part is what I'll hone in on here, right? Um, I'm a scientist. I am almost an accidental entrepreneur, is what I tell people. I used to sell fireworks as a kid, door to door. But after that, I came to the US. Now a proud American. But I couldn't even start a business if I wanted to, and life just took me in this direction. I'm a scientist whose core is to make sure that a scientifically validated piece of technology is brought to consumers. That's where my expertise has always been. That's what I did at Reprogenetics to start off with. That's what I've done in all of my previous ventures. And one of the main parts is making sure that you publish, right? You publish at ASRM, you write essays, you write more about it. That's what we've done at Sama. We've now had more than 4 abstracts that have been accepted at ASRM, 3 for this year itself, all of them validating every individual piece of our technology, right? Right from the AI portion of what we do to the at home portion. We are consistently publishing about it. And that's one of the strongest ways where we want to create the trust with the providers. The way Sama operates today is Invisalign for fertility. So what that means is Invisalign didn't go out and start building Invisalign clinics. They empowered existing physicians and dentists to essentially use Invisalign to grow the number of people that they were able to serve. Because if you're a 35-year-old marketing executive, you don't want to have an inane amount of metal in your mouth. Invisalign got that. They helped orthodontists grow the orthodontia market. That's what we're doing at Sama. How we find our customers is we empower our partners with the at-home modality, and that at-home modality of care can be, performed by their physician, or if they want us to perform the patient management portion of it, we are more than happy to do it for them. The patient goes to them for their high margin activity, which is the laboratory, the retrievals, so on and so forth.
Mm.
Patient management traditionally has never brought any upside to these clinics. So what we offer is a better way of doing that. Reduce your physical footprint and essentially grow your span, what you're able to offer to people, your overall ability to actually contribute towards access of care. Created a market pull,
Yes,
right?
I was
And
gonna,
that is
I was gonna
what
go there.
and that is what I'm interested in doing at Sama right now. That's why we are publishing. That's why we're doing all of these other things under our own banner, which is to create that pull so that we are in fact able to also bring more folks to our partners.
I was curious around the approaches or thinking around how to create the market awareness for the consumer, for the potential patient, so that they could even be the ones driving and asking about that when they are at a clinic, and to create trust on both sides.
No, exactly right. This is one of my favorite activities. Destinee, I don't know if you've done it, but I would walk into a cafe
Yeah.
in urban centers, rural centers, whatever, and I'll just ask people, right? I'll be like, hey, have you heard of IVF? Have you heard of, Sama Fertility? And the findings are amazing. We as a society have barely scratched the surface on creating a national dialogue around fertility.
Mhm.
Forget infertility, forget IVF. We have barely even managed to have a conversation around any of this. And what I think it will drive towards that trust, with that will drive towards a brand that is able to create a national presence, is somebody who is able to get through and start that conversation.
And so I guess, is that what you're seeing for Sama in terms of the next chapter, in terms of the next steps? Because it sounds like you have the current infrastructure and your B2B provider marketing going into the market pretty established. And so I'm curious as to what you're thinking for the next steps with building brand awareness. Now, on the flip side to that, it's expensive, right? I mean, building consumer awareness is also expensive, and getting more expensive. So I'm just kind of curious as to the thinking around that at this time.
It is exactly where I want to go. It is without a doubt where Sama has to go. I am fully aware of how expensive it is, but I have a feeling some of the conversations need to be started before Sama's even a part of it. A lot of these conversations aren't about Sama.
Okay.
A lot of these conversations aren't about any company for that matter,
Yeah.
right? They're about stories of people, real people. I tell everybody, if anything it goes awry, patients have my cell phone number 100% of the times. These are the stories that need to be spoken about. This isn't about any of us, honestly. This is about the future of humanity, and I hope that we recognize this in a short amount of time here.
Yeah. No, I can feel and I get the mission when you say that and when you speak that. It's like you can feel the energy behind it. Are you willing to share how many patients Sama has worked with since launch?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's no secret. Again, we have worked with about 350 odd patients since we started. Thousands of eggs frozen, hundreds of embryos created. We have last count, and somebody on my team is going to thump me in the head if I get this wrong, but about 40 babies that were born through
Mm,
Sawa.
wow.
The validation is in the what do they say? I always mess my Americanisms up. Proof is in the pudding or something,
Yes, that's right.
right?
That's right.
There you go. I told you that English isn't my first language, and it comes to haunt me at the most weird times. But yeah, we have babies born from patients that didn't come in for any on-site monitoring,
Wow.
right? They only came in for their surgical procedures, but otherwise they were completely local.
And you haven't even been in the market for that long.
Been around for about 2.5 years at this
Yes,
point.
that's right. I mean, that's really not long at all for such an innovative solution. That's impressive. Where I guess maybe coming back to childhood, and you mentioned you called yourself an accidental entrepreneur. You mentioned starting your first business very early on. So I'm curious if there has been childhood influences, maybe conscious or subconscious, from parents, from upbringing, environment, that potentially has supported your scientific training to become multiple time founder and entrepreneur.
So I told you I used to sell fireworks. There's a Hindu festival of Diwali,
Yeah.
and I realized that I was quite shy. I would go door to door and sell, and basically encouraged by my parents, by my mom and my dad. They would try to knock into me the good habit of figuring out how much I bought something for and how much money I made. I looped in at some point in time three more friends for my fireworks business. And by the end of it, I mean, it was fantastic. We would have cheap fireworks for ourselves and some extra money to do other things like buy a cricket bat or whatever we did with it. I don't even remember at this point in time.
Well, you shared your mission with passion and conviction of Sama. Any last words before we close out for our listeners, particularly also in the health and wellness communities?
It is important to recognize that Sama Fertility is here to help clinics and patients.
Yeah.
We've consistently heard that we are underserving the market, and by a large degree, the expected number of cycles, have heard varying figures, but I've heard every figure from a million to 1.5 million cycles is what we should be doing, and we're kind of stuck at 340 odd thousand cycles a year. The only way is to think about this, out of the box. Use everything on that is available in terms of tools, and Sama is one of the tools for that. So we can definitely help in changing how people experience care, and hoping that we are able to work with all our friends out in the field today.
Amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I learned a lot as well.
Thank you. Same here for me. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.